By the time really begins, the shock has worn off and what replaces it isn't relief or anger but a grinding, constant exhaustion that settles into your bones, because this is the phase where nothing dramatic happens all at once, it just keeps happening, relentlessly, in smaller ways that add up, and every morning I'd wake up hoping the world had quietly corrected itself overnight, that people would suddenly realize the truth and move on, but instead I'd open my phone to more vague posts, more whispers, more silence from people who used to greet me warmly, and the criminal investigation crawled forward in the background like something distant and unreal while my actual life was actively falling apart in real time, because the restraining order might have been denied, but the phrase, "under investigation," followed me everywhere, it hung in the air during conversations, it lived in the pauses after I explained myself, and it showed up in the eyes of people who said they believed me but still kept a careful distance. And then the detective finally called to tell me charges were being recommended against my ex-fiancée and her sister for filing a false police report and conspiracy, and for a brief moment I felt something close to vindication, like maybe this nightmare was about to flip, but that feeling didn't last, because recommended charges don't fix a tanked business, they don't remove defamatory reviews, and they don't erase the idea in people's heads that you might secretly be dangerous. And while the legal machine slowly turned, the practical consequences hit hard and fast, my income dropped to a fraction of what it was, savings started disappearing just to keep the lights on, and apartment hunting felt humiliating because every application asked for references and background checks and I couldn't stop wondering who had Googled me and quietly decided to move on to the next applicant. And then there were the conversations that hurt in a quieter way, like my parents trying to be supportive but clearly terrified for me, my mom oscillating between rage and worry, my dad offering to help financially even though I knew it scared him, and friends who stayed but didn't quite know what to say anymore, like they were afraid the situation itself might be contagious, and somewhere in all of this I had to grieve a relationship that I now realized never really existed the way I thought it did, because when you replay 4 years in your head through a new lens, every memory becomes suspect, every argument feels like a warning sign you missed, every loving moment feels counterfeit, and the hardest part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was accepting that someone I trusted so completely was capable of casually discussing ruining my life as if it were a strategy game, laughing about it, optimizing it, and then watching her double down even when confronted with proof. And that realization does something to you, it changes how safe the world feels. How easily you trust your own judgment, because if I could be so wrong about the person I slept next to for years, what else could I be wrong about? And that question followed me into every interaction, every job interview, every social situation, even a date I forced myself to go on just to feel normal again, which went fine until the inevitable question about past relationships came up and I kept it vague, only to be quietly rejected later after she looked me up, and that was the moment I understood this wasn't just a chapter that would close neatly, it was a stain I'd have to actively scrub at for years, and when the official charges were finally filed weeks later, people congratulated me like I'd won something, like justice had been served, but standing there reading the court documents with my name and her name on opposite sides, all I felt was tired, because the charges didn't undo the losses. They didn't bring back the friends, the income, the apartment, or the sense of stability I used to take for granted, they just confirmed what I already knew, that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't crazy, and that mattered, but it wasn't enough to make things whole, and as the trial date loomed months away, I realized part 3 of this story isn't about resolution or revenge or closure, it's about the long, unglamorous middle where you keep showing up to a life that doesn't look anything like the one you planned, where you learn firsthand that surviving false accusations isn't about proving the truth once, it's about enduring the fallout long after the proof exists, and choosing, every single day, not to let someone else's life finish destroying what they already tried so hard to take from you. The longer this dragged on, the more I realized that the legal case was almost the least exhausting part of all of this, because at least in court there were rules, timelines, evidence, people who had to listen, but outside of that, in normal life, there was nothing structured about the damage, it just kept leaking into places I didn't expect. Like when my landlord finally confirmed in writing that I had 60 days to vacate because corporate wouldn't renew my lease due to safety concerns, a phrase so vague and sanitized it almost sounded reasonable, even though it was based entirely on lies that a judge had already questioned, and I remember sitting there staring at the email thinking about how absurd it was that I could be cleared in a courtroom and still be treated like a liability in my own home. And packing up that apartment felt like dismantling a version of myself that no longer existed anyway, throwing away wedding planning binders, donating furniture we picked out together, finding random little notes she'd left me years ago that now felt like artifacts from someone else's life, and every object carried this weird double weight of nostalgia and disgust, because I didn't know which memories were real and which were part of the same performance that nearly destroyed me. And meanwhile the business situation kept getting tighter, invoices unpaid, contracts paused indefinitely, potential clients ghosting the moment they needed to run something by their team, which I learned was corporate speak for we Googled you and don't want the risk, and there's a special kind of helplessness that comes from knowing you did nothing wrong and still having to pay for it every single day, because you can't argue with silence, you can't subpoena public opinion. You can't force people to give you the benefit of the doubt when fear is easier. And the worst moments weren't the loud ones like social media posts or angry comments, they were the quiet ones, like sitting at my kitchen table doing math over and over, figuring out how long my savings would last if nothing improved, wondering whether I should just shut the business down entirely and start over under a different name, wondering if that would even matter, or if the internet would follow me forever. And then there were the moments of anger that hit out of nowhere, like when I'd see her sister post selfies online, smiling, living her life like nothing happened, or when mutual acquaintances would casually bring up my ex as if she were a brave survivor without ever asking me a single question, and I'd feel this surge of rage mixed with disbelief, because I was the one who lost my home, my income, my reputation, and yet I was still the one expected to stay quiet, to be calm, to not make things worse, as if defending myself were somehow aggressive, and my lawyer kept reminding me that patience mattered, that every unhinged post they made, every false claim, every attempt to control the narrative was quietly strengthening the case against them. But patience is hard when your life is on pause and the bills don't care about timelines, and some nights I'd lie awake replaying that original conversation in my head, wondering how close I really came to being arrested that day, to being removed from my own apartment in handcuffs, to having my parents get a phone call no one ever wants to get, and that thought alone would send this cold wave through my chest, because if I hadn't been awake that night, if I hadn't recorded that call, I honestly don't know how I'd have survived this, and that realization messed with me almost as much as the betrayal itself, because it meant my freedom hinged on sheer luck, on being in the right place at the right time with the presence of mind to hit record, and that's terrifying, and slowly, begrudgingly, I had to accept that closure wasn't going to look like an apology or public vindication or people suddenly realizing they were wrong about me. It was going to look like rebuilding quietly, painfully, piece by piece, even while the trial loomed in the distance, even while my name was still being dragged through mud by people who would never face consequences for believing the worst, and part of me wanted to scream, to fight back publicly, to correct every lie, but another part of me understood that survival meant restraint, meant choosing long-term truth over short-term satisfaction, and so I kept my head down, documented everything, leaned on the few people who didn't disappear, and tried, day by day, to redefine what moving forward even meant when the past refused to stay buried. My fiancé's family confronted me. Our daughter says you're abusive. We're taking her home. I'm writing this while my hands are still shaking because if I don't get it out right now, I feel like I might convince myself it didn't really happen, but it did, every second of it, and it almost destroyed my life in a single afternoon, so here it is from the beginning, exactly how it unfolded. I'm 31, male, and until very recently I was engaged to the woman I thought I would spend my life with, for years together, 6 months engaged, wedding invitations already sent, venue booked, deposits paid, the whole future mapped out, or so I thought, until about a week ago when she started acting off, pulling away when I hugged her, flinching when I reached for something near her like I was about to hit her, which made no sense because I have never laid a hand on her in anger or otherwise, not once, and when I asked what was wrong she'd say, nothing, and change the subject. Then yesterday she told me she needed space and went to stay with her parents, and I honestly thought it was just pre-wedding nerves or cold feet, so I told her to take all the time she needed, that we'd talk when she was ready. And then today, this afternoon, there was a hard knock on the door, not a friendly knock but the kind that already feels like trouble, and when I opened it, her entire family was standing there, her father, her mother, and her younger sister, and before I could even process it, her dad pushed past me into the apartment and said, "We need to talk, now," and I was confused but stepped aside, thinking maybe something happened, maybe she was sick or upset, but then her mother started crying, like full-on sobbing, saying, "How could you do this? We trusted you with our baby girl," and my brain just stalled out, because I had no idea what she was talking about, and before I could even ask, her dad got right up in my face and said, "Don't play dumb. Our daughter told us everything. The hitting. The verbal abuse. The controlling behavior," and it felt like the floor dropped out from under me, because those words didn't even belong in my life, they didn't match reality, and I said, probably too calmly, "I have never hit her. Ever." "What are you talking about?" And that's when her sister crossed her arms and smirked and said, "She has bruises. We've seen them. On her arms. Her ribs," and her dad started yelling that they were taking her home, that she was terrified of me, that I was sick. And here's the part that matters, the part that saved me, because 2 nights earlier, I couldn't sleep, I went to get water around 2 a.m. and heard my fiancé on the phone in the spare bedroom. The door cracked open, and I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I heard her sister's voice on speaker saying, "No, you need to do it higher up on your arm where it looks like someone grabbed you," and my fiancé replied, laughing, "Like this?" And her sister said, "Not makeup, idiot, use the toothbrush and ruler trick, it leaves real marks but they fade fast, they photograph really well," and then she said the sentence that made my blood turn cold, "It worked for me, I got 15 grand and everyone took my side," and they laughed, actually laughed, about acting scared, about taking photos, about how everyone would believe anything, and I stood there frozen, realizing the woman I was about to marry was planning to frame me for abuse, to destroy my life, and I recorded the rest of the conversation, then spent the next 2 days acting normal while quietly talking to a lawyer and documenting everything, so when her family was standing in my living room accusing me of being a monster, I was calm in a way that surprised even me, and when they said they were taking her home, I said, "Please do," which confused them, and I went and grabbed the suitcase she had already packed and handed it over, and when they demanded I defend myself, I asked calmly what exactly I had done, and when they said bruises, I said I'd love to see them, and when they refused, I pulled out my phone and said, "Before you go, there's something you should hear," and I played the recording, for minutes of my fiancée and her sister planning to fake abuse, planning to ruin me, and the room went dead silent, her mother's face drained of color, her father stared at the floor, her sister tried to grab my phone, and when it ended, nobody spoke. Until there was another knock, the police, because her father had called them on the way over, confident I'd be arrested, but when the officers listened to the recording, their entire demeanor changed, and they explained, very clearly, that filing false abuse reports is a serious crime, and after they left, after they warned the family not to contact me, I told them to get out of my apartment, and when the door closed and the lock clicked, I slid down the wall and just sat there, realizing that 4 years of my life almost ended with me in handcuffs for something I never did, realizing how close I came to losing everything, and this is only part 1, because that confrontation was just the beginning, not the end, not even close. I thought that once they left and the police heard the recording, the nightmare would start to fade, but that was naive, because what I didn't understand yet was that in situations like this, the truth doesn't arrive first, the accusation does, and once it's out there it spreads faster than any evidence ever could. So that same night, after the apartment went quiet and the adrenaline wore off, my phone started buzzing. Not with apologies or concern, but with strange, cautious messages from people who clearly didn't know what to believe. "Hey man, just checking in, heard something weird, hope you're okay, and, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here," which sounds supportive until you realize nobody says that unless they think you did something wrong. And the next morning it escalated, because my fiancée, or I guess my ex at that point, texted me from a number I didn't recognize saying, "We need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding, I love you," and my stomach actually turned. Reading it, because after hearing her laugh about ruining my life, that word love felt like a threat, not comfort, so I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my lawyer like she told me to do, and then her mother called and left a voicemail crying and begging me not to destroy the family over a mistake being a coordinated plan to fabricate domestic violence. And when my lawyer called me back that morning, her voice was calm in that way that only comes from experience, and she said, "Do not respond to any of them, not even once, send me everything, every text, every voicemail," and then she said something that stuck with me, something I hadn't fully processed yet, which was that even with evidence, even with the recording, even with the police having heard it, the accusation itself would still do damage, and she was right almost immediately, because within 48 hours, vague social media posts started popping up from my ex's friends, standing with her during a hard time. "Believe survivors, abusers don't look like monsters," and suddenly my name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Everyone knew who they were talking about, and the comments were brutal, strangers calling me dangerous, saying they always knew something was off, people who had smiled at me at parties now publicly condemning someone they only knew through implication, and when I tried to explain the truth to one mutual friend privately, he replied, "That's what they all say," and blocked me, just like that, years of friendship gone with a single sentence. And then the police followed up, because of course they did. They went to interview my ex, and she doubled down, showed them the bruises, claimed the recording was fake, said I manipulated it, that I was tech-savvy and dangerous, and her sister backed her up, and suddenly it didn't matter that I had proof, because now it was under investigation, which is a phrase that sounds neutral but carries the weight of suspicion everywhere it goes. And then I was served with papers, a restraining order request, her claiming she feared for her safety, which felt surreal, like being accused by someone who tried to burn your house down and then asking the court to protect them from the fire, and my lawyer assured me we'd fight it, that the evidence was strong, but until the hearing I couldn't contact her or go near her, which I didn't want to do anyway. And then came the part that really hit me in the gut, the thing I still think about at night, which was the Google reviews, 1 star, anonymous, all saying variations of the same thing, that I was abusive to women, that people should stay away from my business, posted within hours of each other, and my rating tanked overnight. Clients canceled calls, stopped replying to emails, one straight up told me they didn't feel comfortable, and that's when it fully sunk in that even if I won legally, I was already losing in every other way, financially, socially, emotionally, because the system moves slowly but reputations collapse instantly, and by the time the restraining order hearing finally arrived, I was exhausted in a way I didn't know was possible, sitting in that courtroom watching her sit there in a turtleneck in summer, surrounded by her family, listening to her lawyer describe me as a monster, and seeing the judge listen to the recording, watching her expression tighten as the truth played out in my own fiancé's voice. And when the judge denied the restraining order, saying the allegations appeared fabricated, I felt relief for about 30 seconds before reality set back in, because outside that courtroom, the damage didn't magically reverse, and that night my landlord called to tell me someone had reported me as a danger to the building, and corporate policy meant my lease wouldn't be renewed, and then my biggest client paused our contract because of liability concerns. and that's when I realized this wasn't just a legal battle anymore, it was survival, because proving your innocence doesn't give you your life back right away, it just gives you a chance to start rebuilding from whatever's left. And as I sat alone in my half-packed apartment, staring at wedding deposits I'd never get back and friendships that vanished overnight, all I could think was how close I came to losing everything, not because I did something wrong, but because someone decided to lie. And part 2 ends here not because it's resolved, but because this is the point where I understood that the confrontation wasn't the climax of the story, it was the ignition, and everything that followed would burn much longer and much hotter than I ever imagined.